Welcome to Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Open University MBA program, Managerial Economics subject. Now today we are going to talk about introduction to cost concepts. We will talk about costs and their types and how they are used to analyze to determine the profit. Now what is a cost? If you look at the definition, it is the value of the total resources used in creating service, in producing goods, or it is the amount incurred to produce goods and services. Now, why it is important? The costs are important because they help in determining the prices. You may have to estimate the total amount needed for the production facilities, that is budgeting. You have to make some decisions for financial analysis. So for all these purposes, you need to identify what are the costs, what are the types of costs, what exactly is the cost, what is the value of the costs. Now we look into types of costs: fixed costs, variable costs, semi-variable costs. These are the three broad categories of the costs. What are the fixed costs? Fixed costs are those costs which do not change with any level of production. For example, if you have a staff member who can produce 200 units of goods in a production facility, whether he produces 10 units or 100 units or 150 units or 200 units, you have to pay him the same salary. So it is fixed. Now when I say it is fixed up to 200 units only. If I had to produce 210 units, then I may have to employ another staff member or another foreman or workman. So fixed costs are fixed irrespective of the volume of the output, but it is limited up to a certain level of output, just like we have seen in the salaries. Same case with rent. Let us say for our production facility, we have acquired a property, leased a property for about 200,000, 2 lakh rupees, and the area of that facility is about 10,000 square feet. 10,000 square feet is demanding 2 lakhs of rent. So whether we use one room in that facility of 10,000 square feet or two rooms or 500 square feet or 5,000 square feet or 10,000 square feet, up to 10,000, the rent remains the same. So these costs like rent and salary or the fixed costs. Now let's look at the variable costs. What are the variable costs? It is opposite to fixed costs. As you produce, so is the variable cost incurred. For example, if you want to produce a job of, let's say, 2 ton weighing, now you have to use 2 ton steel, and there may be some components inserted there, assembled there in that job, but the steel required is 2 tons. Now let's say if you want to make 2 jobs, you need to procure 4 tons. If you want to produce 5 jobs into 2 tons, so 10 tons of steel you had to acquire. Let's say each ton of the steel costs about 20,000 rupees. 20,000 into 10,000 is the total cost to produce 10 jobs. But if you are producing only one job, then you will be incurring only that amount of cost. I mean to say 20,000 into 1. Okay, so this is what the variable cost, the cost that changes along the output. When you are producing only one product, you will incur less amount of cost. When you are producing 10 units, then you have to enhance the production costs. So the variable costs are those costs which changes along the output. Now, I would like to relate the variable cost and fixed costs here. Now, when you look at the fixed costs total would not be changing, but the fixed cost average would be changing. How? Let's say if you're producing 10 cars in a facility and the facilities are demanding, let's say, the employee cost and the other expense, rents, let's say 2 expenses we take, for example, in this example, salaries and rents, we had to incur the same salaries and rents for the total 10 cars production. Let's say you produce only 1 car, also there is no change. You produce 5 cars, there is no change. Look at the average cost or per unit cost. When you produce only 1 car, the per unit cost is the total cost by 1. That is equal to whatever cost you incur is the per unit cost or average cost. Now, when you look at 5 units production, the total cost by 5 and the cost will be reduced when you look at 1 unit and 5 units. And when you produce 10 cars, the total cost by 10, the cost will be further reduced. What is that you observe? The average cost, average fixed cost is coming down as you enhance the production. When you are producing at a low level, your average fixed cost is high. When you produce increasing to the next level, it comes down. And when you reach the peak, also the fixed cost comes down. So this is the nature of the fixed cost. Now let us look at variable cost. Variable cost per unit will be fixed. Though the total variable cost changes along the output, the variable costs per unit variable cost or the average variable cost is always fixed. How? Now, then each metric ton of steel costs about 20,000. Whether you produce 1 unit or 5 units or 10 units, the per unit cost of the steel is same. It is 20,000. There is no change in the per unit cost. So, what is that we understand? The average variable cost is constant. It does not change with the level of output. The average fixed cost comes down as you increase the output. The total fixed cost is fixed up to a certain level of output, but the total variable cost will be changing along the output. As you increase the output, it increases. As you decrease the output, it decreases. So these are the 2 types of costs: fixed cost, variable cost. Now, there is another type of cost which is partially fixed in nature and partially variable in nature, like for example your utility bills or telephone bills. Now, if you look at the power bill of your office or your domestic consumption, up to 200 units, there is a certain slab. Whether you use 10 units or 20 units or 50 units, the slab is fixed as for 200 units, the rent to be paid is this much. Now, beyond 200 units, per unit you have to pay extra this much. So, it is partially fixed, it is partially variable. So, therefore, it is containing the characteristic features of both variable and fixed, and you call it semi-variable cost. Now, then you may argue, sir, why should we call it semi-variable cost? Why can't I call semi-fixed cost? Yes, you can call it as semi-fixed cost also. So, these are based on the nature. Then let us look at the relevance. There are the categorization based on the relevance. Direct and indirect cost is another classification. The direct costs are those costs which can be attributed directly to a production facility or a service. For example, let's say in a facility like DRDO, Defense Research and Development Organization, there are many departments. There are missile departments, there are healthcare department. Okay, so what is the cost of this power consumption pertaining to BRAHMOS unit? This is attributable directly to that BRAHMOS unit. There is some type of cost where you cannot attribute. Let's say the Chief Security Officer of DRDO. Now there are many departments in DRDO and there are many sub-departments there, and in each department there is a security officer in charge and there are security guards deployed there. All of them are managed by one head called Chief Security Officer, and this Chief Security Officer's service is common across the facility, across the departments, across the company. So therefore, his salary is indirect. You cannot attribute to a particular department. You cannot, you cannot say that his salary can be put it in so and so department. You cannot do that. Any cost that is not possible to be attributed to a particular department, that's indirect cost. Any cost that you can easily attribute, like labor, like materials, you can attribute. So these are direct costs. Now let's look at another cost, marginal cost. Marginal. Don't get so frightened when you look at the term. The literal meaning marginal means additional. That's it. In economics, marginal means additional, marginal benefit, additional benefit, marginal cost, additional cost. What is marginal cost? The additional cost to produce one unit extra. The additional cost to render one more customer of your service. If you are a service organization, another unit of cost, let's say dollar or rupee, some more money that is required to render one more customer extra. That's additional cost. The additional cost incurred to produce additional unit or additional to serve additional customer. Now, why it is important? It is important in decision making. Now, when I say decision making, you have alternatives. When you have alternatives and you have to choose one among the alternatives. Decision making is your ability to choose among the alternatives. When you are choosing the alternative, you choose definitely the best alternative. So, the decision making, when you are making decision, you make optimal decision. You make optimal decision in your production. So, to make that, marginal cost is useful. In decision making, marginal cost is more relevant and useful. Now, let me present before you another cost, that is opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is the cost of next best alternatives. I said just before, decision making is choosing among the alternatives, and marginal cost is useful in choosing one of those alternatives. Now, among the alternatives, I said you will be choosing the best one. Now, while choosing the best one, you are neglecting the next best one. Let's say if you have 5 alternatives, you rank them, and top one you consider the best, the second one you consider the next best, and you go on giving the ranking like that 1 to 5. 1 being the best one, you choose it. Now, for choosing the number 1, you are neglecting, you are ignoring, you are discarding the number 2. Now, what is the cost? What is the benefit that is foregone for not choosing the second alternative? The cost of not choosing the second alternative, the cost of next best alternative, the alternative 2, is what opportunity cost. It is actually not a cost, but it is a benefit foregone for not choosing the alternative to the next best alternative. Now, it is important, very important, when you are having a trade-off, conflict, trade-off situation. You are perplexed, you are confused, you are confounded to make a particular alternative to be the best. So, at the time, you rank these alternatives and you calculate for not choosing each alternative, what is the revenue that we will be losing, and the best alternative you consider the number one, right? So, therefore, in application, we use the opportunity cost in the time of trade-off between best and next best alternatives, right? We will look at now into sunk costs. What are the sunk costs? The costs that are already incurred and cannot be recovered. Let's say, you see, it's an irreversible decision of the cost. When I say it is irreversible, the amount that is spent you can never get back. You don't have control over that cost. For example, some time back, a particular company has set up the fuel outlets across the country. Now, there was some problem, and the launching, though it was launched, it could not be operationalized across the country. Now, for each petrol station or oil bunk, they have spent about 5 crores, starting from acquisition of the land and setting up the equipment, filling the tanks underground. So, all that, and taking the permission from the government, approvals from the government. So, all that was about 5 crores for each filling station. Now, they want to stop that. They felt that it was not viable and they have closed it. When they have closed it, about 1,500 petrol stations across the country they have opened, and when they have found there is a challenge and they had to close it, and finally 1,500 into 5 crores. 45 crores is lost. It is sunk. It is irreversible. What you have spent, 45 crores, is gone. It is a cost that you cannot get back. And I just would like to make it more simple. When you're applying a paint to the wall, you cannot get back that paint, right? Yeah, this is not the paint I wanted to apply to this room. So let me take out this paint and then use it for other room. No, you can't do that. The paint that is applied to the room or a hall is a sunk cost. You cannot get it back. You cannot alter it. You don't have any control over that. You don't have any influence for future decision making. Now, let me present another category of costs, that is irrelevant and relevant, or relevant and irrelevant costs. Relevant costs are affected by a decision and should be considered. If it is relevant, then you should consider those relevant costs. At times, there are certain costs which will not be influenced or which will not influence your decision. Now, you don't consider those costs. Let's say you are making an MOU, memorandum of understanding, with let's say Indian companies entering into memorandum of understanding with a foreign company. Now, the understanding is that there is no change in the employees, there is no change in the facility. Only thing is they will pump in the capital into the Indian company through the foreign direct investment, FDI. They just pump in the foreign capital to modernization. Now, there is no change in the employees costs, there is no change in the rents, there is no change in the land. So, it's irrelevant. What is relevant is what is the revenue extra we are going to generate with this extra capital that is infused. that is relevant, because unless we are hoping to generate extra revenue and extra profit, that's marginal revenue, marginal profit, we don't go ahead with inviting foreign capital. That's therefore, there are certain costs, certain revenues which are relevant. So you have to consider as part of your decision those relevant costs. Now, having understood the types of costs, we will look at the cost, volume, profit analysis. Cost, volume, profit analysis. Now, cost is there, and volume is there, and profit. Now, what is the cost incurred for a given level of profit, and what would be the given level of output, and what would be the profit? I come again. What is the cost incurred for a given level of output, and for each level of output, what is the profit or loss that the company may incur or yield? Now, this is what we do in CVP analysis, or cost, volume, profit analysis. Now, it analyzes the changes in the cost and it changes in the output. As a result, what would be the profit also is analyzed. Now, in this CVP analysis, we talk about contribution, we talk about break-even point, and we also plan for the profit. Now, when I say contribution, it is the difference between sales revenue and the marginal cost or variable cost. Sales revenue minus variable cost gives you contribution. If it is a total sales you are using and total variable cost if you are using, then you will get total contribution. And if it is per unit sales revenue or selling price if you are using, and per unit variable cost if you are using, then you get contribution per unit. Contribution per unit is equal to selling price minus variable cost per unit. And if it is total sales minus variable cost, total variable cost gives you total contribution. And this contribution is very crucial in most of the decision making processes. And break-even point to calculate, we use contribution. Yeah, the formula to use break-even point is fixed cost by contribution per unit, that is selling price minus variable cost per unit. Now, what is break-even point? It is the point where the company attains no profit and no loss. Below this point, the company incurs loss. Above this point, the company yields profit. So, break-even point is the point where there is no loss and no profit. And this is the point that companies all the time look for. Now, graphically, if you present, it looks like this. Yeah, you have the output on the x-axis, you have the revenue and cost on the y-axis. So, this is the total revenue curve and this is the total cost curve. Then the total revenue curve is overtaken at this point by the total revenue curve. The total revenue curve is overtaken by the total cost curve. Come again. The total revenue curve is overtaken by the total cost curve. Below this point, you see loss, and above this point, you see the profit. Now, you see fixed cost. This area is treated as fixed cost, and this area is treated as variable cost. Okay, and together is total cost, right? And this is the point where you will be incurring no cost, no loss and no profit. This is the point where you incur no profit and no loss. In units, if you produce these many units, and you will be at no profit and no loss. If you yield this much revenue, you will be at no loss and no profit. Now, the cost allocation. So, you are distributing the costs. And based on the activities you distribute the cost, and based on the departments and type of process you distribute the cost. For example, activity based costing is based on the per activity you attribute the cost. Now traditionally what we do is there are certain type or category of costs which are incurred at production facility, then factory costs. There are certain costs that are incurred at administrative office level, then they are called administrative expenses or costs. Then you have selling and distribution point also, there also you incur costs. So selling and distribution expenses or costs. So based on the type of or category or the place, you are distributing the cost into three sections: factory, administrative, selling and distribution expenses. You deduct all this from your sales revenue, total sales revenue, you get what is known as profit. Now economies of scale, what is this? With the large scale production, you will be having advantage of incurring lowest average cost of the resources. When you are incurring lowest cost of average cost of the resources, you're enjoying more profit. Okay, so the cost advantage that arises with increased output is economies to scale. On a large scale production, on a large scale purchases you make, when you are making large scale purchases, you are availing some discounts. When you are availing discounts, the cost of the material is going down. Now that's what we see when you are buying 1 kilogram of rice for your mess, when you are buying or your cafeteria in your company, when you are buying 1 kilogram or 10 kilograms or 20 kilograms or 20 bags of rice, the benefits are different. There are discounts available. On a large scale production, you will be yielding more profit. It's because of economies to scale. Now these economies to scale are both internal and external. When I'm expanding, when I'm increasing the production, what happens is I will be using the facility, I will be using the service of the same employee, even for two departments, even for enhanced production. I'm enjoying his service as an entrepreneur. So this is economies to scale which I am enjoying internally. This is internal economies to scale. Previously I said the discounts that you can get from the suppliers of the material, that's external economies. Internal economies and external economies. Now in conclusion, the key points are how to make a decision is based on your understanding of the types of cost concepts, okay, types of costs, and there you have the fixed costs, you have variable costs, you have semi-variable costs, you have marginal costs, you have relevant costs, you have irrelevant costs, you have sunk costs. So all these costs are to be taken into consideration before you make decision. So this is all about cost concepts and analysis.